So once I have access to my modernizer, then I'm going to check if my browser is going to support web workers or not. So the way I'm going to do it is in my start worker method. Like I said, I had start worker, I have stop worker methods which are empty right now, which we are going to fill it with how do we communicate with web workers. So I'm going to check if my browser is going to support web workers using this very specific statement, modernizer.webworkers. If it is true, then go ahead and instantiate your timer web worker. If type of timer web worker is equal to undefined, then I'm going to instantiate a new instance of my quiz timer, the chicken quiz. Okay, and then I'm going to send a message to my timer web worker and send it some parameters that says okay. Okay, and this is how I'm going to send a message, the post message method. So in the two-way communication part of it, this is how I communicate from my web page to the timer web worker. We'll take a look at the code in quiztimer.js in a quick second here, but when I say timer dot post message, it's going to send a message to the worker, and the message will be here is a chicken quiz and it has a 50-second time limit. Okay, then I need to listen for any events that are coming from my web workers. So for that, I'm just going to add a listener for a message event, for an on message event, and say once I get, let me show you this. And then when I get a message in the event.data, you remember in the two-way communication or one-way communication, event.data is where the real data resides. Like messages that are transmitted will have a data property in the event that is coming in, and that is the data that is being transferred across. So in this case, what I'm going to do is document.getElement by id of time remaining. You remember the output element that I showed you at the very top, right here, right next to the chicken quiz question. I'm just going to set an output value, and I'm going to set the value of whatever data that is coming from the web worker to it. And if the data is eventually 0 seconds remaining, then I'm going to say stop worker. So let's see what comprises stop worker. So in this case, I'm just going to say terminate on okay, and then I'm going to set timer web worker is equal to null, and then we are pretty good. So this is the code that is required to instantiate communication and call a web worker from your web page. So first check for the browser support, then check if your worker has already been instantiated and in process. If not, then try to send a message to your worker with the right command and parameters. So if you look at the code for worker message, I have a custom function here which says okay, set the command and parameter, and then when I'm listening for an event, then I'm going to say add event listener from my web page from your worker, and I'm just going to do whatever I want to do with my event.data, and I'm eventually going to say stop worker when I think this worker has completed enough work for me. Okay, again, the other other important factor that I was mentioning previously was the time to instantiate and the time for communication that happens should be less than the processing power itself. In this case, I may not have gained much, but to keep it simple, to show you the concept of web worker, then I have done that. Okay, so let's take a look at the JavaScript class that we have. The first thing that I need to do with my JavaScript is listen for any events from my page. So if you looked at the quiztimer.js, I'm just going to listen for this dot add event listener and listen for any message that is coming from my web page. And when I say time count, call a function called time count. Let's go and take a look at the time count function. Again, as usual, the data comes from event.data, and my event.data contains a command and a parameter value that I set from my web page. Then I'm going to check if it's a chicken quiz question, then send this kind of message. Whatever seconds remaining from message from of whatever is the time limit, and then I'm going to say post message. So when I say post message from my worker, it's going to send a message back to the main page. Okay, so when I say post message web worker.post message, it's going to send a message from the web page to the worker. In this case, when I say quiz from the quiztimer.js, when I say this dot post message, it's going to send a message to the main web page UI thread. Okay, and then I'm using set timeout function, which is again an HTML5 function, HTML function that's going to make a recursive call to the time count function here and say 500 millisecond time limit. Every 500 milliseconds, just go ahead and call this time count function. Okay, it's like a recursive, like it's a common feature, right? So whenever you are tasked with reading from a directory or subdirectory, then you keep on recursing until you hit the final subdirectory. So it's very similar. So I use that concept in a very similar way using this set timeout function. So every 500 milliseconds, this timed event count keeps getting recursively called. And like another important aspect, you should always close the timer workers, because once it starts listening, is instantiated and starts listening for the messages, it's going to, until you kill the web worker, it's going to keep on listening. Okay, and for more sophisticated examples, there is this website that I wanted to show you guys. It's called Mandelbro. So it's a pretty interesting website here. Show you that, and then we should be wrapped up with our session today. Mandelbrot. So it's a pretty sophisticated mathematical objects that you use to generate these images. So how do you explore Mandelbrot set? He has shown a very good example here of how to use web workers in a sophisticated way. If the web workers have to communicate among themselves, like between web workers, there is something called message channels. Again, that would be out of the scope of this session. But again, like I said, if you want to go ahead and look at more advanced concepts, that is where you start. Maybe we can take a look at some other advanced session, and that'll be good. Then here he is showing you how to leverage web workers. Here is the URL. Okay, and he has shown you how to use your web workers and how is he listening back on various messages. It's a pretty interesting thing. Just go take a look at it and take a step. Okay, hope I have given you enough information that is helpful for your preparation for HTML5, and see you next time.